Willem van Oranje-Nassau was born in 1533 not into rebellion, but into the very heart of the European establishment. He was a German count by birth, but a twist of fate made him a prince of two worlds. At the age of 11, he inherited from his cousin the vast estates of the House of Nassau in the Netherlands and, most prestigiously, the sovereign Principality of Orange in southern France. This inheritance transformed him overnight from a minor German noble into one of the most significant landholders in the Habsburg Low Countries, modern-day Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. There was one condition: the ruler of these lands, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, was the most powerful man in the world, a staunch and devout Catholic. William's family was Lutheran. To claim his inheritance, the young William had to move to the emperor's glittering court in Brussels and be raised as a Catholic under the emperor's personal supervision. And so, the boy left his German home and entered the sophisticated, French-speaking world of the Habsburg court. He proved to be a brilliant and charming student. He excelled at everything he did, becoming a master of diplomacy, languages, and courtly etiquette. The Emperor Charles V doted on him, seeing in the young prince a future pillar of his empire. William became a trusted courtier, a member of the emperor's inner circle, and was appointed to the powerful Council of State. At the grand ceremony of Charles V's abdication in 1555, it was on the shoulder of a 22-year-old William of Orange that the weary, gout-ridden emperor leaned for support, a powerful public symbol of the trust and favor he commanded. He was a loyal servant of the crown, a Catholic prince in a Catholic empire. There was no sign of the revolutionary he would become. When Charles V abdicated, his vast empire was divided. His son, Philip II, inherited Spain, its American empire, and the 17 provinces of the Netherlands. Unlike his father, who had grown up in Flanders and understood its independent-minded people, Philip was thoroughly Spanish. He was a cold, micromanaging absolutist who viewed the Dutch traditions of local autonomy and religious tolerance with deep suspicion. The Netherlands was a unique jewel in Philip's crown. It was not a unified country, but a patchwork of wealthy, self-governing provinces and cities, a bustling hub of commerce and intellectual life. It was also a place where the Protestant Reformation, particularly Calvinism, had taken deep root, especially among the skilled artisans and merchants. Philip, a fervent Catholic who saw himself as the divine protector of the faith, was determined to crush this heresy. He escalated the enforcement of anti-Protestant laws, empowering the dreaded Inquisition to hunt down, torture, and execute heretics with brutal efficiency. William of Orange, as a leading nobleman and stadtholder, governor of several provinces, was now in an impossible position. He was sworn to uphold the king's laws, yet he was a man who, despite his Catholic upbringing, believed in religious conscience and was horrified by the brutal persecution of his people. He saw Philip's policies not just as cruel, but as a dangerous violation of the traditional rights and privileges of the Dutch provinces. He began to subtly but firmly oppose the king's policies in the Council of State, arguing for moderation and tolerance. It was during a hunting trip in France that a now famous incident occurred. The French king, believing William was in Philip's confidence, spoke openly of a secret pact with Philip to exterminate all Protestants in their respective realms. William, though shocked, held his tongue, betraying no emotion. This event, according to his own memoirs, solidified his resolve and earned him his famous nickname, Willem de Zwijger, William the Silent, not because he was quiet, but because he was a master of keeping his own counsel, a discreet and unreadable diplomat. The situation escalated dramatically in 1566. A wave of iconoclastic fury, the Beeldenstorm, swept through the Netherlands. Calvinist mobs, enraged by the opulence of the Catholic Church and the persecution, stormed churches and monasteries, smashing statues and defacing religious art. To King Philip II, This was an unforgivable act of sacrilege and rebellion. His response was swift and merciless. In 1567, he dispatched his most formidable and ruthless general, Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, the third Duke of Alva, at the head of 10,000 veteran Spanish soldiers. Alva's mission was simple: to crush the rebellion, exterminate Protestantism, and impose absolute Spanish rule. William, knowing he would be a primary target, fled from his ancestral home into German exile just before Alva's arrival. Alva established a special tribunal that would become infamous as the Council of Blood. It bypassed all local laws and summarily tried and executed thousands of people for heresy and treason. Among the first to be publicly beheaded were the Counts of Egmont and Horn, two of William's fellow nobles who had stayed behind. Believing they could reason with the Duke, their deaths were a chilling message to all who might oppose Spanish rule. Alva's reign of terror had begun. From his exile, William watched in horror. He had lost his lands, which were confiscated by Alva, and was now a declared outlaw. The charming courtier was gone, replaced by a rebel leader. Using his vast remaining fortune, he raised a mercenary army and launched the first unsuccessful invasions of the Netherlands. The rebellion had begun, but it needed a symbol. It found one in the most unlikely of names. When a group of minor nobles had petitioned the Spanish regent a year earlier, a courtier had sneeringly dismissed them as nothing but beggars, gay. The name was seized upon as a badge of honor. The rebels became the Jusen, the beggars. The most effective of these were the Waterguzen, the sea beggars, a wild, desperate fleet of pirates, exiles, and patriots who preyed on Spanish shipping from their bases in England and northern Germany. The prince had his cause. Now he had his shock troops. For years, the rebellion simmered as a low-grade, desperate struggle. William's initial invasions failed to spark a general uprising, and the sea beggars were a nuisance to the Spanish, but lacked a strategic base. William was nearly bankrupt, his cause on the verge of collapse. Then, on April 1, 1572, a stroke of pure, unplanned luck changed the course of the war. A fleet of sea beggars, expelled from their English safe havens by Queen Elizabeth I, was trying to appease Spain, were caught in a storm and sought desperate refuge in the small, lightly defended port town of Breel. Finding the Spanish garrison absent, they simply stormed the gates and captured the town in the name of the Prince of Orange. The capture of a minor fishing port was, in itself, insignificant, but its symbolic power was immense. For the first time, the rebels held a piece of the homeland. The news spread like wildfire through the provinces of Holland and Zeeland, a region of defiant port towns and waterways, perfectly suited for the sea beggars' brand of amphibious warfare. One by one, inspired by the improbable victory at Breel, towns began to declare for the Prince of Orange, overthrowing their Spanish loyal magistrates and welcoming the beggars. A small spark had ignited a raging fire. William, seizing the moment, returned from exile. The disparate acts of piracy and protest began to coalesce into a true revolution, with William of Orange as its undisputed political and moral center. The Duke of Alva responded to the spreading rebellion with the same methodical brutality he had shown before. He unleashed the full might of the Spanish army, the finest and most feared fighting force in Europe, on the rebellious towns. This period became known as the Spanish Fury. Cities that resisted were subjected to horrific sieges, and when captured, were brutally sacked. The towns of Mechelen, Zutphen, and Naarden were scenes of unimaginable slaughter, where the civilian population was massacred indiscriminately to make an example of them. But instead of terrorizing the Dutch into submission, the Spanish fury forged an iron resolve in them. The sieges of cities like Haarlem and Alkmaar became legendary epics of civic defiance. At Haarlem, the entire populace, including women led by the heroic Kinau Hasselier, fought on the walls for 7 months before finally being starved into Submission, after which the surviving garrison was executed. At the siege of Alkmaar, the rebels, facing certain defeat, turned to their most powerful and desperate ally, the sea itself. They opened the dikes, flooding the surrounding countryside, and turning their fields into a treacherous swamp that bogged down the Spanish army and forced them to retreat. This tactic was repeated a year later at the pivotal siege of Leiden. The city was on the verge of starvation when William ordered the dikes to be broken. A relief fleet of sea beggars, sailing on the rising floodwaters over what had once been farmland, smashed the Spanish siege and brought food to the starving city. The Dutch had shown they were willing to rather ruin the land than lose the land, a resolve that Spain could not break. Despite these heroic victories, William understood that this struggle could not be won by military means alone. He had to win the war of ideas. In 1580, Philip II, frustrated by the endless rebellion, declared William of Orange a traitor and an outlaw, placing a massive bounty of 25,000 golden crowns on his head for his capture, dead or alive. William's response was not to hide, but to publish his apology, one of the most powerful pieces of political propaganda of the age. It was a searing public indictment of Philip's tyranny, a detailed list of the injustices inflicted upon the Netherlands, and a passionate defense of his own actions. He cast the struggle not as a religious war, but as a fight for traditional freedoms and liberties against a foreign despot. Crucially, he argued that a people were not bound to obey a prince who had violated their rights and become a tyrant. This revolutionary idea laid the groundwork for the final, decisive political break. In 1581, the representatives of the rebellious northern provinces met at The Hague and passed the Act of Abjuration. It was a formal declaration of independence, a statement that Philip II had, through his tyrannical actions, forfeited his right to rule them. They were no longer rebels fighting their king. They were a new state fighting a foreign enemy. Though the war would rage for decades more, the ideological birth of the Dutch Republic is found in this bold and unprecedented act, an intellectual precursor to the later American Declaration of Independence. The bounty on William's head made him a marked man. Several assassination attempts failed, but on July 10, 1584, at his home in Delft, a Catholic fanatic named Balthasar Gerard, posing as a nobleman, managed to gain an audience with the prince. As William was climbing the stairs, Gerard shot him at close range with a pistol. William's last words were reportedly, "My God, have pity on my soul. My God, have pity on this poor people." The assassination of their leader was a devastating blow to the Dutch cause, but it did not break it. In death, William the Silent became a martyr and a national icon. His quiet determination, his sacrifice of personal wealth for the public good, and his unwavering belief in freedom of conscience had laid the foundation for the new nation. He had not lived to see it, but his sons, Maurice and Frederick Henry, would continue the fight, becoming brilliant military commanders, who would eventually drive the Spanish out of the northern provinces. The 80 Years' War finally ended in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, which formally recognized the Dutch Republic as a free and independent nation. The charming courtier who had once leaned on the emperor's shoulder had become Pater Patri, the father of the fatherland. He had taken a collection of disparate, rebellious provinces and, through his quiet resolve and immense personal sacrifice, had forged them into a nation that would become a global center of trade, tolerance, and liberty. His legacy, the House of Orange-Nassau, remains the royal house of the Netherlands to this day, a lasting testament to the prince who became a rebel and the rebel who became a founding father. The death of William the Silent was the crucible in which the true character of the nascent Dutch Republic was forged. His assassination did not cause the state to collapse, as Philip II had hoped, but instead galvanized its resolve, transforming a movement led by one man into a collective national struggle. The provinces, bound together by the blood of their martyred leader, refused to yield. The Council of State, led by the astute Johann van Oldenbarneveld, provided the political continuity, while the military leadership fell to William's second son, Maurice of Nassau. Maurice was not the diplomat his father was. He was a military prodigy, a student of classical tactics who would revolutionize European warfare once again. He transformed the rebellious Dutch militias and mercenary bands into a highly disciplined, professional army. He introduced new methods of drill, smaller and more flexible infantry formations, and perfected the art of siege warfare. Under Maurice's command, the Dutch army went on the offensive, systematically recapturing city after city from the Spanish. In a series of brilliant campaigns that became known as the 10 Years of Glory, 1588 to 1598, the war continued. An epic multi-generational struggle of sieges, naval battles, and economic warfare that ebbed and flowed for decades. The Dutch Republic not only survived, but thrived. Its navy, born from the audacity of the sea beggars, grew to dominate the world's oceans, creating a vast and wealthy global trading empire that stretched from the Americas to the East Indies. Amsterdam replaced Antwerp as the financial and commercial hub of Northern Europe. The very war that was meant to crush the Netherlands instead fueled its golden age, a period of unprecedented prosperity and extraordinary artistic and scientific achievement, producing masters like Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Huygens. Finally, in 1648, after 80 years of conflict that had reshaped the political and religious map of Europe, Spain formally recognized the independence of the Dutch Republic in the Peace of Munster, part of the wider Peace of Westphalia. The struggle that began with a prince's quiet defiance had ended in the birth of a powerful and prosperous new nation, a republic built on the principles of commerce, tolerance, and a fierce spirit of independence. William the Silent's ultimate victory was not just a military or political one. It was the creation of a society that, for a time, was the most liberal and dynamic in the world, a lasting testament to his belief that a nation's strength lies not in the absolute power of its ruler, but in the liberty and spirit of its poor people.